We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Chaf Tesam and Beis in Meseches Bava Basra. This is Bava Basra Daf 129b. And the previous Amud, the Gemara brought the Mishnah which said, let's say a person wants to give a different amount in terms of Yerusha than the amount that is set by the Torah. He wants to give a little more to one, a little less to the other. So as long as he uses the language of matana, of gift, as opposed to the language of Yerusha, of inheritance, then it's fine. If he uses the language of matana, he's essentially saying, I want to give a larger gift to this one and not to that one. But if he uses the language of Yerusha, that's problematic, because then he's saying that he wants the inheritance to be different than the way it's structured in the Torah. That's masnal mashakasa b'Torah, and that is problematic. That's what the Mishnah said. And on the previous Amud, Rav Sheshes said that when he uses the word matana, it is effective even in a situation where he's giving to two people two different fields, meaning he gives one person one field and he uses the language of matana, he gives the other person a different field and he uses the language of Yerusha. Rav Sheshes says we can apply the language of matana that he says to the first person, we can apply that to the second person, and we say that both gifts are actually effective. And the Gemara on the previous Amud, and in the Gemara on the previous Amud, Rav Sheshes brought a proof from a Brisa. The Brisa says, let's say a person says to a caretaker, give a shekel per week to my sons, and really in order to sustain them, it really would be a selah. It really takes double that amount to sustain them. So we assume that he doesn't really mean exactly a shekel, he just means give them the minimum that they need for sustenance, and the person should give one selah per week. However, if the language that is used, the Brisa says, if the language that is used is only give them a shekel, so in that case it means to say only a shekel and no more. And the Brisa now continues, Yirshu acherim tachteim. Let's say the person says, after they die, after my sons die, I don't want their sons to inherit, rather I want these other people to take whatever is left of the inheritance. So then, Bein Shamar Tanu, whether he said give a shekel a week, Bein Shamar Al Titnu, whether he said only give a shekel a week, it doesn't make a difference. Ein nosin lahem ela shekel. Still, you only give them a shekel. And the idea over here is, as the Rashbam explains, Yirshu acherim ploni uploni v'lo b'nei bona. He's saying, I want so and so to get my property, and not the children of my children. So then, Gali Adaite, then he's showing Denichole b'tzimtzum tzvei, that he wants it to be very exact. He wants to give the smallest amount possible, only a shekel and no more. That way they'll be remaining from his property to give to these other people. He wants there to be a remnant left over that's going to go to these acherim. V'davka kamar shekel. So then we assume that he only means to say a shekel, and again a shekel and no more. And the point over here is, as we will see, here in this brisa, it's using a language of Yirshu acherim tachteim. It's using a language of Yerusha. And so the Gemara continues, V'hacha, but over here in this case, it's really the same thing as two fields being given to two people. V'katani dekani, and we are saying that it is effective. And the Rashbam explains, V'hacha dekamar loshen matana levanav. He's saying a language of a gift with regards to his children. He's saying give a shekel a week. Kedekatani tenu shekel livni. It says give a shekel to my sons. V'loshen Yerusha lacherim, and he's using the language of Yerusha when it comes to the others. He says Yirshu acherim tachteim. Kedekatani Yirshu acherim. It says that others should inherit. V'katani dekanu hanu acherim, and it says that those acherim, they are kona. After the sons die, the property goes to them. Because that's the whole point of the end of the brisa. It says, "Ein nosin lahem el shekel." You only give them a shekel. That way, there'll be something remaining from the property to go to these other people. This is certainly similar to two fields to two people, because it's two totally separate gifts. He's saying give a shekel a week with the language of matana to my sons, and he's saying Yirshu acherim tachteim. That is a different thing that's being given to other people. The levan of nasan shekel b'chol shabbos kol yimei chayim. To his sons, he's giving a shekel every week for their whole lives. V'hamoser, and then the rest of it morish la'acherim tachteim is going to the others. V'hainu ke'ein beis sadus u'beis b'nei adam. It's exactly like two fields to two people. Shein zoch and zeh b'chai zeh klal. They're not even, one is not getting during the lifetime of the other at all. It's like two fields. Nevertheless, these others do acquire. The language of matana that you used by the sons is working by the language of Yerusha, even though you used Yerusha by the others. We're applying the lashon of matana there, and that seems to be exactly like Rav Sheshes. And the Gemara continues, Hu Mosivla, he asked the question, meaning Rav Sheshes, he used it as a proof for himself and asked it on the others. V'hu Mefarikla, but he answered it as well, meaning on their behalf, that the Brisa is talking, B'roi L'Yarsho, these acherim who he's giving it to, it's not just other random people, but it is actually people who are fit to inherit. For Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, and actually this Brisa is following the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. And the Rashbam explains, "Hu mosiv la v'hu mefarik la." He asked the question and he answered it. De lo tikshi lechaveirav, meaning that it should not be a question to those who argued with him. Beroy liyarsho, that we're actually talking over here of not just acherim, we're talking about people who are fit to inherit. To hide the kanu acherim beloshan Yerusha. And when we say that the language of Yerusha works for these other individuals, la'av mishum demahani leiloshan matana deidach. It's not because there was a language of matana used by the other people, by those other sons. Ela mishum dehani acherim have ruim liyarsho. It's a completely different reason. These other people that are inheriting after the sons die are actually fit to inherit him. They're actually his yarshim. Kigon banav, meaning they're other children. Let's say he has sons. Some sons he's giving a shekel a week, and then the other sons he's giving the remnant of whatever, the remnant of the property. Vehechidami, what would be the case as follows? Kigon de l'shnayim ibanav tziva lase shekel b'Shabbos. Let's say to two of his sons he says, give 1 shekel a week. V'yamesu, and then when they die, if they die, yirish echad mishar banav kol hamoser. One of his other sons is going to get everything that remains. Even though there might be other sons, but that's the point. He's going against the general Yerusha. There might also be children to those sons who died. And why does this work? It's because we're following a different Tana. It's like the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, Da'amar Lakamon, who says later on, according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, if somebody says on one son among the other sons, I want this son to get all the property, Devar of Kayam, and that is effective. Shekel, and therefore, again, you only give these sons a shekel per week, because he wants there to be remaining for this other son, Shuoev, who he loves, he wants to give him all of it, he wants to give him as much as possible. And the Gemara continues, Amar Ravashi, Ravashi says, Tashma, come and hear a proof from the following brisa. Let's say he says, I'm giving my property to you, and after you, so-and-so should inherit, and then after that person, Yirash Ploni, so-and-so should inherit. So Meis Rishon, so when the first person dies, Kana Sheni, the second person will inherit. Meis Sheni, when the second person dies, Kana Shlishi, the third person will inherit. V'yim Meis Sheni b'chai Rishon. Now let's say the second person, he dies while the first is still alive, so then that breaks the chain, and Yachzru Nechasim L'Yarshe Rishon. Then the property goes to the heirs of the first individual. And so the Gemara brings a very similar proof as brought from the previous brisa. V'hacha, but over here, Techeshtei Sados U'Shnei B'nei Adam Dami. Again, it's like giving 2 fields to two different people. You're giving the property first to one person, then later, after that person dies, it's going to a second person. V'katani dekanan, it says over here that it is effective. Again, the language of Yerusha seems to be effective. Why? Because since the language of Matana was used by the first one, that is going to be applied throughout. Again, it seems to be a proof for Rav Shesh's position. Now, if you're going to say Hachanami here also, Beroy L'Yarshuv Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, he'll give the same answer we gave on the previous brisa. This brisa is not talking about where the property is just going to some random individual, but we could be talking about multiple sons over here. And so he gives it to one son, and then he says, after you die, I don't want it to be divided like a normal Yerusha. I want it to go to this particular son, and when he dies, I want it to go to this particular son. And maybe we're following Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, but there's a problem with that, because if so, Meis Sheni Kana Shlishi, it says that if the second one dies, let's say the second son dies, so then the third son will acquire. And would Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka agree with that? Hashalach Ravacha Breder Avavia, Ravacha Breder Avavia, he sent L'divrei Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. He said, according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, Nechasai Lach ve'acharecha leploni. Let's say a person says, I'm giving my property to you, and then after that, I'm giving it to so and so. V'rishon roy liyarsho, and the first person is fit to be an heir. Ein l'sheni b'makom rishon klum. The halacha actually is the second person doesn't get anything. B'makom rishon she'ein ze lashon matana el lashon Yerusha, because this is not a language of a gift; it's a language of an inheritance. V'Yerusha ein lahefsek, and in Yerusha it's not something that can be cut off. Meaning to say, according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, it is true that you can say about somebody who's fit to inherit you that I want this particular son, let's say, to inherit all of my property, and that works as a Yerusha. It does not work as a gift, according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. But since Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka holds that it does work like an inheritance and it's not a gift, therefore Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka holds it only works that one time. When you give it to that first son and you say you want that son, for example, to inherit everything, that will be effective. But if you then say acharecha, it's going to go to somebody else, that you cannot do, since Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka holds it is not working like a gift, so it's really a Yerusha, and Yerusha ein lahefsek. Once there's a Yerusha, now it goes to that son, and then it proceeds like a regular normal Yerusha. It cannot be redirected according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. And the Rashbam explains, Hashalach Ravacha sent to Yerusha ein lahefsik. Again, Yerusha has no hefsik. V'kevan d'haisheni b'toras Yerusha bo liyadu. Since what we're suggesting is the first person is getting it as a gift, and then the second person it's following Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, it's a Yerusha. But ein koach biyad hames lakor nachla miyorsha yorshav. But now there's no strength in the hand of that second person who dies to uproot the nachla that it should go somewhere else. L'sita l'hai shlishi, to redirect it that it goes to the third. El yachzor nechasim liyorshe sheni. What will happen actually is the property will go to the Yorshe Sheni. The Kevan Daso Lahai Sheni Yoresh, because once you've made the second person a Yoresh, he's not receiving a gift. So Kiyamar Nami Basrei Daha Yoresh Aninosin Lishlishi. So when you say then that after that Yoresh I want it to go to this third individual, Havale Masnal Mashakasa B'Torah, that's already making a condition against what's written in the Torah. Techsivu Ven Ein Lo Ayin Olav. Again, it says if he doesn't have a son, you have to look and see. You have to see if there's any grandsons, etc. The idea is whoever is first in inheritance, so then his children, his descendants come first. Certainly where he himself inherits the property. We're not able to take it away from his sons, and so therefore we cannot say that this brisa follows Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. And the Rashbam continues, L'divrei Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, Desfir le da'av yachal lahorish b'lashon Yerusha, li'achon mibanav kol nechasav. Again, according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, that a father can give to one of his sons in a language of Yerusha. Imamar le'achon mehem nechasai lach, if he says to one of them, my property goes to you, kinim mefarish l'kamei, this will all be explained more further on. V'rishon roy li'yorsha, we're talking where the first one is able to inherit him. V'lo perish lo lashon Yerusha v'lo lashon matana, and the case specifically is, the father did not say any language in this case. He didn't say Yerusha or matana, so ein l'sheni b'makom rishon, the second one is not going to get anything. Oh, yorshe rishon klum, he's not going to get anything in the face of the first one or in the face of the heirs of the first person. She'ein kan lashon matana l'hai rishon, because according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, it certainly was not a gift to the first. El mistam l'lashon Yerusha chavin. It makes sense to say that it was a language of Yerusha echavin hanosin that the giver was intending. B'ma'id amar nechasai lach, if he says nechasai lach, because again, according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, that's generally how it works. Ho'el v'chazal yarish kol nechasim min haTorah, since he's able to inherit all the property from the Torah, if the father wants. V'kevan to Yerusha havil harishon. So once we assume it's a Yerusha to the first person, again, eino yachol afsika, it can't be cut off, it can't be redirected. De'ein Yerusha lechatzayin. There's no such thing as an inheritance that's just halfway. And the Rashbam continues, L'kaman b'pirkin parchinan. Later on in the parak we will ask on this. Ha'ifsuka v'chulu, isn't it already cut off in a certain sense? And the Rashbam notes, V'davkol Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. All of this is only according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. Avol Rabbanan, but according to the Rabbanan, Kevan de'enu yachal harbos Yerusha lazeh yoser mizeh b'lashon Yerusha klal. The language of Yerusha doesn't work at all according to the Rabbanan to give this one more than the other one. So vaday ma'idamar nechasai lach l'rishon. So then we know for sure when a person says nechasai lach to the first son, lashon matanu, it certainly is a language of a gift. V'yachal afsika, therefore it could be cut off, it could be interrupted and redirected. V'yikn shlishi, and the third person will be able to acquire. And the Gemara continues, since this brisa cannot be Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, so tiyuv to kulu, let's say that this brisa is a refutation of all of the Amoraim above, who said that by two people and by two fields, the language of matana that's used by one cannot be applied to the other. Here it seems that that language can be applied to the other, and the Gemara says tiyuvta, indeed it is a refutation of those Amoraim. And the Gemara continues, Lema nami tehavi tiyuvta de Reish Lakish. According to that, let's say this is also a refutation of Reish Lakish, because he also said that by two people and two fields we don't apply the language of matana from one to the other. But the Gemara says v'tizbra, but can you really say that? Is it logical? V'amar Rava, didn't Rava say hilchis hakavase de Reish Lakish? It's lost that the halach is like Reish Lakish in these three cases, and this is one of those three cases. So how can you say that Reish Lakish is refuted? And the Gemara says we can answer the question from the Bryce according to Reish Lakish. Lokash, it's not difficult. Kan besoch kedei dibor. In one case we're talking about toch kedei dibor, then you can apply the language one to the other. We'll see the Rashbam in a moment. But kan liachar kedei dibor. But if it's after kedei dibor, that's after the amount of time that a Talmud says shalom to his Rebbe. If it's after that amount of time, so then already you can't apply the language one to the other. And the Gemara concludes v'hilchas, and the halacha is kol toch kedei dibor kedibor dami, that toch kedei dibor is considered like the same dibor, like the same speech. Levar me'avodas kochavim, with the exception of avodah zara. And the Rashbam explains to yuvta dekulu bar me ravin aliba de Rabbi Yochanan v'Rav Sheshes. Let us say that this is a refutation of all of the Amoraim, except for Ravin according to Rabbi Yochanan, and except for Rav Sheshes, because Ravin according to Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Sheshes, they said that by two people in two fields, you are allowed to apply the language of matana that was used by one to the other. And the Gemara said, well, to Yuftei de Reish Lakish, it should also be a refutation of Reish Lakish. Diyamar Lashon matana lazel lo mahani, l'lashon Yerusha lazel. Reish Lakish also said in the previous Amud that the language of matana used for this one doesn't apply to the language of Yerusha used for that one, but that's problematic. Amar Rava beparak hacholetz, didn't Rava say in Yavamis Hilchasa that the halach is like Reish Lakish? Vizu achas mehen, this is one of those cases in Yavamis that's mentioned that the halach is like Reish Lakish. V'misa to have a brisa to Yuftei. Now, if this brisa was a refutation of Reish Lakish, lo paskin and Hilchasa hachi, we wouldn't paskin like Reish Lakish. And the Rashbam continues, lo kash, it's not difficult. Hadakatani matana lazev Yerusha lazed dekanu shneyin. When we say that if he uses the language of matana for this one and Yerusha for that one, that it is effective, that's what we say in the brisa. Lo kasha Reish Lakish. That's not difficult to Reish Lakish. Diamar lo kan, who says it's not an effective kinyan. Brisa dekamar v'acharecha yirash ploni, because the brisa which says that the person uses this language after you, so and so will have a Yerusha, and again we are applying the language of matana there as well. Toch kedei dibur harishan. That was all. That was very close to the first statement. That was within the amount of time. Again, it says for within the amount of time that a Talmud says shalom to his Rebbe. Within that amount of time, he made that statement. The Kamar nechasai lach, he said, I'm giving my property to you. And then right after, toch kedei dibur, he said, v'acharecha yirash ploni. Hilkach mahani matana derishon gam l'sheni. That's why the word matana by the first person helps for the second. V'hai the Kamar Reish Lakish lo kana b'shtei sadus u'shnei b'nei adam. And when Reish Lakish said it's not an effective kinyan by two fields and two people, hai lashon Yerusha, when the language of Yerusha is used, hai no lachar kedei dibur. That's if that language is used after kedei dibur. Ulachi lo mahani le lashon matana. That's why you can't apply to it the language of matana. The hai al lashon Yerusha the idach. You can't apply the language of matana of this one to the lashon Yerusha of the other one. V'achi Kamar Reish Lakish, and that's what Reish Lakish was saying. Liolam lo kana b'la'achar kedei dibur. It doesn't work la'achar kedei dibur. And shiyomer ploni ploni until you say it in this particular fashion. V'hilkach keven to Kamar lashon matana atarvayu afilu la'achar kedei dibur shaper dami. Reish Lakish in the previous Amud had a very specific formulation, and if you do it in that formulation, then it would work even la'achar kedei dibur. But otherwise, it's only going to work toch kedei dibur. That's what Reish Lakish would say, and that's how he can be consistent with the brisa. And the Rashbam notes, now nevertheless, Rav Dimi, Rav Elazar, Tosfu Lagamri. What about the other shitas? Rav Dimi, Rav Elazar, they are totally refuted. They cannot give this answer of a distinction between toch kedei dibur and la'achar kedei dibur. Diamri lo kana lebesada achas o adam echad aval shtei sados u'shnei b'nei adam lo, because the way they phrased it is, it only works if it's one field or one person, but if it's two fields and two people, they said it doesn't work. Now when you phrase it in that way, dilidituka, according to them, afilu toch kedei dibur amri lo kana, they're saying when it's two fields and two people, even toch kedei dibur, it's not a good kinyan. How do we know that? Because if they held that two fields and two people, it would be effective if it was toch kedei dibur, lishmeinon dekana, so then it should have said that that's a kinyan by toch kedei dibur, and then I'd for sure know. Certainly if you have one field and one person, according to Rav Dimi, or let's say it's two fields and one person, or two people in one field, Rav Elazar, according to Rav Elazar, afilu la'achar kedei dibur, even la'achar kedei dibur. But from the fact, obviously, that they hold that you cannot apply the lashon matana to the lashon Yerusha, only by cases of one person in one field, they're implying that anytime you have a case of two fields and two people, that it never works, whether it's toch kedei dibur or whether it's liachar kedei dibur. And the Rashbam continues, toch kedei dibur, again, hainu kedei she'elas Talmud Rav. That's the amount of time it takes for a student to ask shalom, to say shalom aleichem to his Rebbe. That's the amount of time of toch kedei dibur. And the Rashbam continues, v'hilchasa kol toch kedei dibur kedibur dami. That's the halacha, that toch kedei dibur is kedibur kol shnei dvarim sha'adam motzi mipiv. If a person says two things, zachar zeh, one after the other, besoch kedei dibur, and it's besoch kedei dibur within a few seconds of each other, shesayim dibur harishon, right when he finishes the first part of the phrase, immediately hischil dibur ha'achron, he starts the second part, lo chashvinan le nimlach. By toch kedei dibur, we don't say that the person is changing his mind. We treat it as though he's saying the two things at once. And the Rashbam goes on and explains what do we do when someone says two things at once. So it depends on the situation. If you can take both things seriously, let's say he says that this is going to be an exchange of an ola and an exchange of a shlamim, you could sell it, you could bring half the value as an ola, half of the shlamim, half as a shlamim. The Rashbam goes on to say what you do in various cases when you can't reconcile. And finally, the Gemara said, Toch kedei dibur is kedibur dami everywhere except levar me avodas kochavim, except for avodas zara. Shem hitfis o hiksa davar la avodas kochavim. Let's say he designated something for avodas zara. Uvesoch kedei dibur chazar bo, then toch kedei dibur he retracted. So afilu hachi. So normally we would say toch kedei dibur kedibur dami. It's not avodas zara. But afilu hachi nesser, we say no. We say that it is going to be considered aser mishum chumra da avodas kochavim, because we're strict by avodas kochavim. We are extra strict, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Lamed Amud Aleph.